Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked here on the channel. This is the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because I am still questing for my life's purpose. Today we are talking about Becky Chambers' A Prayer for the Crown Shy. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I bought this copy of this book myself, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. It's only a novella, so it might be a little bit tricky. If you want to go into this knowing absolutely nothing, come back when you've read it and we'll talk then. And I will link the storygraph for the book down below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. This is actually a sequel, and normally I would talk about the two books together, but I already have a video up for book one, which is A Psalm for the Wild-Built, so you can go check that out if you would like. This is the sequel. It published in July of 2022, which feels like a really long time ago. I was convinced this was a 2023 release. Turns out I was wrong. If you haven't read any Becky Chambers before, I would suggest going back and watching my Psalm for the Wild-Built video before you watch this, because it might not make too much sense. But on the off chance that you've stuck around and you don't know who Becky Chambers is a hugely prolific sci-fi primarily author who has written all sorts of things and is probably best known for her Wayfarers series, A Closed and Common Orbit, and so forth. This is the Monk and Robot series, which is her novella duology. Different thing. We're not in that same universe. A Prayer for the Crown Shy follows on pretty directly from book one. We are following the same characters. We have the cleric Dex and we have the robot Moscap. They are both still on their quest. However, this time, instead of a quest into the wilderness, we are going across the moon of Panga, where Dex lives, and where there are all these human settlements. They are travelling between them, and they're doing so in order to find the answer to Moscap's question, what do people need? So it's one of those novellas where it doesn't necessarily have a three-act structure to it. It is more a observation of a journey. Let us answer the question together. Should you read A Prayer for the Crown Shy? So one of the key themes of this novella duology is the idea of purpose and the search for it. That is something that's hugely prevalent in book one around Dex and what they're doing. In book two, we see more around Moscap's purpose, I would say, though the theme is still there. Just broadly speaking, what does purpose look like in a world where we're not necessarily driven by capitalism in the same way as we are now? It very much leans into that Solarpunk thing of imagining a more hopeful future, but still picking apart what that looks like and where humanity, which is inherently a bit crap, falls flat in those moments. As someone in their late 20s, I definitely relate to that theme, but I think a lot of people can. And I think the way that Becky Chambers approaches it in this book feels very gentle, it feels very exploratory, and it doesn't feel like a self-help book disguised as a sci-fi novel, which I think this ran the risk of being. Especially this second book, because we're seeing more about how life is for everybody else. Where in A Psalm for the Wild-Built we saw Dex in their life and we saw a little bit of the world around them, we were mostly in their sense of lack of purpose, whereas in this book we get to see a lot more exploration of how other people live and why other people are happy or not happy. There's also an exploration of I'm trying to think of the right wording, the way that Moscap's people, the robots, they have rules and they have things that they care about, and we get to see a lot more of that in this book, which is very interesting. There's a particular scene that I don't want to spoil because I do think you should get to enjoy it for yourself, but there's some really lovely talk about how the robots live and their life cycle almost, which is very interesting. So thematically, I think it's wonderful. I think it's the perfect theme for a novella because you don't have to get too deep into the weeds around it. You just get to explore it kind of, not surface level is the wrong word, but you get a very broad look at it rather than digging hugely deep and it feeling like a self-help book. My rainbow catcher has just caught the sun, so I'm now starting to get red light directly into my eyes, so that's fun. I mentioned it a bit, but I did really enjoy the fact that we got to see more of how society functions in this world. I thought it was really interesting to get to see different civilizations and see the ways in which they are the same, the ways in which they're different. We go to at least one very different place, which I thought was worth including and made the world building feel even more rich, just this sense of vastness to the world. I think probably one of the more interesting aspects of this is what the technology is like and how people are kind of sustainably living in this future, which I found very hopeful. I like to imagine a future where we are functioning and nobody's killing the planet for oil. That's a nice thing to think about here in 2024. It is always one of my favourite things about sci-fi is the world building, and I definitely think Becky Chambers knocks it out of the park in this one. Compared to book one, I think it's interesting because obviously they're very different. In that book one we saw a lot of the wilderness and a lot of introspection and a lot of the history, whereas now we're seeing more of the present. But I personally think that may have even been more enjoyable for me, just as an interest of mine. I also think that the dynamic between Dex and Mosscap, who are the characters we see the most in this book, is just still wonderful. It's definitely developed from the first book. There's more rapport between them, there's more dialogue, there's less of a sense of trepidation from Dex, and it sort of turns into a really lovely friendship story that I really enjoyed. I thought it was really great. Overall, I had a great time reading this. I will say I think it hits much harder on a reread, because I remember originally reading this when it came out and not feeling like it was as good as book one. Because on reflection now, I think there's a lot more about it that I enjoy than in book one, but I think that may be because book one is just more of a solid story, whereas the kind of way that book two gives context to book one and all of that stuff makes book two feel better to me now. So just bear that in mind. If you've read this once and you weren't super sold, it might be worth giving it a reread. If you are planning on reading it, it might be worth trying to schedule in a little bit of a cheeky reread in the future. I just think it benefits from a little bit of time to reflect on it. If you are someone who isn't used to novellas, perhaps you're a fan of Becky Chambers' longer work, I would say that this is very novella in the way that it sits. If I think back to the early days of me reading them, I often left novellas feeling like I wanted more. I don't feel that way now. I think I'm so used to the format and the way that the story beats hit that I don't get that sense of where was the rest of it. But if you haven't read a lot of novellas before, just know going in that it's not going to feel like a 3-act structure. I do think Becky Chambers is quite helpful for that because not a lot of her books do. The format is a novella. If you don't like novellas, go into this knowing that. If you have only read Monk and Robot and you're looking for more Becky Chambers to read, I highly recommend picking up A Closed and Common Orbit. I will link my review for that series somewhere sensible at some point. If you're looking for other novellas to read, one of my other favourite novellas of all time is Silver in the Wood. Very different from this, but again, thrives on that short form format. Also recently I read Sun Daughters, Sea Daughters by Amy Ogden, and that was another book that I just felt sat perfectly in a kind of novella space short format, and also has some wonderful sci-fi elements to it as well. So those are some novella recommendations from me to you. Overall, should you read A Prayer for the Crown Shy? I would say if you've already read A Psalm for the Wild Built and liked it, I think you will like this too, depending on your reasoning for liking book one, but realistically you are probably going to enjoy the second book. I wouldn't read it without having read the first book. I don't think it'll make a lot of sense to you. I think they do need to be read as a duology. They also need to be read in publication order, or they won't make very much sense. But I do think it's a really great novella. I think it's a fantastic example of that format. I think it's a lovely solarpunk novel, again, a standout for that genre. It's just beautiful. I really love how Becky Chambers crafts a world and thinks about technology and science and then gets deep into philosophy. It's a really great story. Highly recommend. Yes, you should read it. To answer my question from the beginning, yes, you should read it. Have you read this or book one or anything else Becky Chambers? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also come hang out on Discord where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, access to my weekly live streams and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. The sun is absolutely blazing in here. I'm so sorry if it throws off the white balance. The rainbow catcher is just getting very intense. I will get up and change you very soon.